Just when you thought America's cities couldn't get any worse, Philadelphia drops a bombshell that's left officials scrambling and residents fleeing. The recent point-in-time count uncovered figures so staggering they're making headlines from coast to coast. We're talking about 5,191 people experiencing homelessness in the city of brotherly love, the highest since 2020 and the third consecutive year of increases nobody saw coming. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. The number of people living completely unsheltered, human beings sleeping on concrete, under bridges, in abandoned buildings, jumped by a mind-blowing 38% in just 1 year. That's 976 souls with nowhere to go, no roof over their heads, fully exposed to the elements in a city that endures freezing temperatures for months. Put differently, nearly 1,000 people have become invisible to a society that's supposed to protect them. The demographic breakdown is even more disturbing. Despite making up only 40% of Philadelphia's total population, Black residents account for a staggering 68% of those experiencing homelessness. This isn't just a housing crisis, it's a glaring spotlight on systemic inequality that has festered for decades. And if you think this is only about adults making poor choices, think again. 17% of the homeless population are children under 18, while 16% are seniors over 65. We are literally watching kids and grandparents freeze on America's streets. Philadelphia has earned the devastating title of America's poorest big city, and these numbers prove it's not just a catchy headline. With a poverty rate of 20.3%, 1 in 5 residents struggles to meet basic needs. That's higher than Houston, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles combined. When you're competing with cities 10 times your size and still rank poorest, something is fundamentally broken. What makes this even more shocking is that the crisis is accelerating while other cities see improvements. The unsheltered population now reflects a 16% rise over pre-pandemic levels, proving that all the Build Back Better talk amounted to little more than rhetoric. These aren't temporary setbacks, they're permanent scars on a city once celebrated as the birthplace of American freedom. Welcome to Kensington, a neighborhood synonymous with everything wrong in modern America. The D officially calls it the East Coast's largest open-air drug market, but that clinical label barely conveys the horror show unfolding here daily. We're talking about 1 square mile, roughly 2.6 square kilometers, that looks straight out of a post-apocalyptic film, where people shuffle like the Walking Dead in broad daylight. Viral videos from Kensington have amassed over 300 million views on YouTube alone, and they're not viral because they're uplifting. Viewers worldwide watch in morbid fascination as Americans stumble about in drug-induced stupors, openly injecting substances that would terrify medical professionals. The phrase, Kensington zombies, is searched more than 3,600 times each month, turning real human suffering into macabre entertainment. What those videos don't reveal is how the drug crisis has morphed into something even more sinister. It's no longer just heroin or fentanyl. A veterinary tranquilizer called xylazine, street-named Trank, now appears in over 90% of Philadelphia's street drugs. This compound causes wounds that simply will not heal, creating open sores spreading across users' bodies like a horror film plague. Medical professionals call it the most devastating development of the opioid crisis yet, and Kensington is ground zero. Kensington alone accounts for 337 of Philadelphia's unsheltered residents, more than 1/3 of everyone sleeping on the city's streets, concentrated within just a few blocks. The neighborhood endured a 23% rise in unsheltered homelessness over the past year, with an average annual increase of 12% since 2016. This isn't a gradual decline, it's a community in complete freefall. Longtime residents describe scenes that sound like science fiction. Kiara Lynn Garcia, who grew up in Kensington and later moved to China, realized the extent of her neighborhood's collapse after viral videos reached her friends abroad. She returned from 8,000 miles, about 12,800 kilometers, away to find businesses shuttered, familiar stores like Rainbow Clothing vanished, and once safe streets resembling war zones. The most chilling part? This is happening just 8 subway stops from the spot where the Declaration of Independence was signed. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. America's birthplace of freedom now hosts its greatest concentration of human misery. Patrol cars cruise through constantly, yet officers often glance at their phones instead of intervening in the chaos. It's as if everyone has collectively given up on saving this corner of the nation. What began as a containment strategy has spiraled into a humanitarian disaster spinning completely out of control. While politicians dispute solutions and experts trade blame, real people die on these streets every single day. When most people picture homelessness, they imagine a specific type of person, probably someone who brought it on themselves through bad choices or addiction. But the reality of who's actually sleeping on Philadelphia's streets will shatter every stereotype you've ever held. These aren't the faceless statistics politicians toss around at press conferences. These are real people with real stories, and their fall from stability happened faster than anyone wants to admit. Meet Sarah, a single mother of 2 who was working full-time as a medical assistant just 18 months ago. When her landlord sold the building and her rent doubled overnight, she found herself choosing between keeping her apartment or feeding her kids. Now she's sleeping in her car with her children, showering at the local YMCA, and praying nobody from Child Protective Services finds out. Sarah represents a growing demographic that housing advocates call the new homeless, working families who simply can't afford to exist in their own city anymore. Then there's Marcus, a 34-year-old Army veteran who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He came home with PTSD that the VA system failed to properly treat, lost his job because of panic attacks, and spiraled into homelessness within 6 months. Marcus is part of the veteran population that makes up a significant portion of Philadelphia's street dwellers, despite the city's claims of supporting those who served. He sleeps beneath the same bridges he once protected as a soldier, invisible to a society that thanked him for his service but abandoned him when he needed help most. The LGBTQ+ youth crisis is perhaps the most heartbreaking. 17-year-old Alex was kicked out of their family home for coming out as transgender, joining the estimated 40% of homeless youth who identify as LGBTQ+. With nowhere to turn and aging out of the foster system, Alex now survives by couchsurfing and occasionally sleeping in abandoned buildings. The discrimination they face when trying to access shelters often makes the streets feel safer than seeking help. Even more shocking is the rapid rise in homeless seniors. 68-year-old Dorothy worked as a school cafeteria employee for 30 years before her pension was slashed and medical bills from cancer treatment wiped out her savings. She's now part of the 16% of Philadelphia's homeless population over 65, sleeping in libraries during the day and walking the streets at night because most shelters lack the medical support she needs. These aren't people who dreamed of living on the streets. They're former teachers, retail workers, construction crews, restaurant servers, the backbone of American society who discovered that the safety net they thought existed was actually full of holes. Many held jobs right up until the moment they became homeless, shattering the myth that homelessness only affects the unemployed or addicted. Here's the dirty secret city officials desperately don't want exposed. Philadelphia's homelessness crisis isn't some unfortunate accident of circumstance. It's the predictable result of policies and decisions that created what experts call a containment zone that backfired spectacularly. The truth about how Kensington became America's ground zero for human misery involves deliberate choices that prioritized political convenience over human lives. In the 1990s and early 2000s, hundreds of unregulated recovery houses began sprouting throughout Kensington like weeds. These facilities, often run by people with no medical training or legitimate oversight, were supposed to help people recover from addiction. Instead, they became what one state representative dubbed the drug rehab capital of the world, a dumping ground for people with substance abuse problems from across the region and beyond. The city's strategy was brilliant in its cynicism. Rather than addressing addiction and poverty citywide, officials essentially created a geographic container where all the undesirable problems could be concentrated. Former Mayor Ed Rendell even opened one of the nation's first needle exchange programs specifically in Kensington, sending a clear message about which neighborhood was designated as the sacrifice zone. As Robert Fairbanks, a University of Pennsylvania professor who studied the system, explained, the question became not about eradicating poverty and drug addiction, but how to manage it. This containment strategy worked perfectly for politicians who could point to other neighborhoods and claim success while quietly letting Kensington spiral into chaos. It was politically viable because the people being contained had no political power, no voice, and no way to fight back. The policy was essentially, let them destroy themselves in this one area, and we'll protect everywhere else. But here's where the plan went catastrophically wrong. Concentrating that much human suffering and addiction in one geographic area created a feedback loop that made everything exponentially worse. Drug dealers flocked to the area for the guaranteed customer base. Violent crime followed the drug trade. Property values collapsed, driving out anyone with resources to leave. What was supposed to be containment became amplification. Now we're seeing the ultimate failure of this strategy. The current administration's response? Mayor Sherrell Parker announced a $100 million plan to build a new facility in northeast Philadelphia, essentially trying to move the problem to yet another location. Experts who've studied similar approaches in other cities already predict failure, calling it an expensive way to repeat the same mistakes. Meanwhile, gentrification is pushing poverty into even more concentrated pockets throughout the city. Neighborhoods like Point Breeze and Fishtown are seeing longtime residents displaced by rising rents, forcing them into the few remaining affordable areas, which are quickly becoming the new Kensingtons. The city is essentially playing a shell game with human misery, moving it around instead of addressing the root causes. The most infuriating part? Successful models exist and are working in other cities, but they require political courage that Philadelphia's leadership apparently lacks. Imagine waking up every morning with no alarm clock, no warm coffee, no bathroom, just the cold concrete beneath your body and the crushing weight of another day you have to survive. For nearly 1,000 people in Philadelphia, This isn't a nightmare scenario or some distant tragedy happening to other people. This is their daily reality, and what they endure would break most of us within days. The morning routine starts with the most basic human need: finding somewhere to relieve yourself. Public restrooms are virtually non-existent in the areas where homeless populations concentrate, so people are forced to use alleyways, abandoned buildings, or, if they're lucky, a sympathetic business owner might let them use a facility. The dignity that most of us take for granted vanishes when you're begging strangers for permission to use a toilet. Next comes the hunt for water and food. Soup kitchens have long lines and limited hours. Churches might provide leftovers, but you'd better arrive early. Some resort to digging through dumpsters behind restaurants, competing with rats for scraps the eateries throw away. The irony is devastating. In a city where food waste is rampant, people are literally starving just blocks away from abundance. But the physical challenges pale in comparison to the psychological warfare of being invisible. Jennifer, who's been on the streets for 8 months, describes the soul-crushing experience of walking through Center City while commuters step over and around her as if she's a piece of furniture. They look right through you, she explains. Like you don't exist. Sometimes I'll say, "Good morning," just to see if anyone acknowledges I'm human. Most days, nobody does. Sleep becomes a strategic military operation. Park benches get claimed early, and you'd better be prepared to defend your spot. Cardboard becomes precious currency. It's insulation from the cold concrete and the only barrier between your body and the ground. In winter, the temperature can literally kill you while you sleep. Hypothermia takes people silently, and by morning, someone who was talking and laughing the night before simply doesn't wake up. Summer brings different terrors. Dehydration strikes fast when you have no access to air conditioning or consistent water sources. The smell becomes overwhelming. When you can't shower regularly, when your clothes can't be washed, when you're sweating through the same outfit day after day, your own body becomes another source of shame. Many try desperately to maintain some appearance of normalcy, washing in public fountains or using shelter facilities when available, clinging to whatever dignity they can preserve. The constant threat of violence looms over everything. Vulnerable people sleeping outside become targets for robbery, assault, and worse. Police interactions range from complete indifference to outright harassment. Your belongings, whatever few possessions you still have, can be stolen while you sleep, destroyed during cleanups, or confiscated by authorities who treat homelessness like a crime. Perhaps most heartbreaking is watching people slowly lose pieces of themselves. The businessman's tie disappears first, then the pressed shirt, until eventually the person who once ran meetings and made decisions is unrecognizable. The elderly woman who raised 5 children and worked for 40 years begins forgetting her own worth. The college graduate with an engineering degree starts believing they deserve this fate. Mayor Sherelle Parker swept into office with a promise that resonated with fed-up Philadelphia voters. She would shut down the Kensington drug market once and for all. Her tough-on-crime approach struck a chord with residents who felt abandoned by years of what they saw as weak leadership. But now, 6 months into her administration, the reality of her strategy is sparking fierce debate and raising serious questions about whether she's addressing the crisis or just making it worse. Parker's 5-phase plan sounds impressive on paper, but critics call it a militarized response to a public health emergency. Phase 1 involved clearing homeless encampments from Kensington Avenue in massive street sweeps that looked more like military operations than humanitarian interventions. Hundreds of officers descended on the area, forcing people to move with just minutes' notice, destroying belongings, and scattering the population without providing adequate alternatives. The numbers tell the story of the crackdown scope. Parker boosted police presence in Kensington from about 40 officers to 120, including 75 new recruits cutting their teeth on one of America's most complex social crises. The administration pushed through legislation forcing businesses to close between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., effectively turning parts of the neighborhood into a police-controlled zone overnight. Police Commissioner Kevin Bethel promised, "There will be arrests," and he's delivered. Officers are now booking people for drug possession, public urination, loitering, and other quality-of-life violations once overlooked. Jail intakes have surged, yet critics note that cycling people through the criminal justice system addresses neither addiction nor mental illness nor housing instability. The most controversial element is Parker's decision to pull $1 million in city funding from Prevention Point, the needle exchange program that has operated in Kensington since 1992. The program provides clean needles, overdose reversal medication, and harm reduction services that have prevented countless deaths and infections. Medical professionals warn that eliminating these services during a fentanyl crisis could spark an explosion of HIV, hepatitis, and overdose fatalities. Dr. Sarah Johnson, an addiction medicine specialist, calls the approach backwards and dangerous. She explains, "You can't arrest your way out of a public health crisis. These policies criminalize people for having a disease, and history shows punitive approaches to addiction make everything worse, not better." The results so far are mixed at best. While Kensington Avenue itself appears cleaner to casual observers, workers in the area report that the problems have merely shifted to surrounding blocks. West Kensington, North Philadelphia, and other neighborhoods are seeing rises in encampments, drug activity, and related issues. It's the same shell game played for decades, moving the visible signs of crisis rather than addressing its root causes. Community activists are especially frustrated by the lack of services accompanying the enforcement. Parker talks about building a $100 million facility in Northeast Philadelphia, but that's years from completion. Meanwhile, people are being arrested and displaced with nowhere to go for treatment, housing, or support. The human cost of this approach is becoming clear in real time, and the question remains, is Philadelphia finally getting serious about solving its homelessness crisis, or just getting better at hiding it?